recently did a video talking about how Commander might not be to blame for some of the issues that you have with current Magic, how formats are being handled and how Wizards have handled Magic in general. If anything, I think the push towards Commander, or the complete hyper-focus of Wizards on Commander, is an example of the issue they have. That sometimes Wizards of the Coast, or Wizards under Hasbro's exerting pressure, it has like a very narrow view of where to take things. It sees a success, it just keeps going. And if it sees one singular failure, it's throw it in the fire and just pour oil on it and let it burn. An example of this that I talk about from times gone by, and this is from a long time ago, is that a modern event deck can't work because the original one didn't work, the black-white tokens deck. But anything I've learned from YouTube is that doing one style of thing once is that it might not succeed. You need to reiterate or try a few times to see if the idea has no legs. You might have just not executed the idea correctly the first time. Meanwhile, Wizards will also take the feedback of something being successful and just rolling with it, perhaps a little too hard. So for example, the Walking Dead Secret Lair sold like the best Secret Lair ever at time of it coming out, and thus that means that Universes Beyond is without fault, and that obviously isn't the case. With all that said though, I am going to talk a bit about how design for Commander kind of makes things power crept and a little bit handholdy, both in the realm of playing Commander itself, but also bleeding through to other formats. Weirdly, one of the cards I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk about two Commanders in particular, but one of them has bled out into Modern a little bit, and I think the card is cool, and I might put some gameplay on the channel of playing with that card. So weirdly, the handholdery, everything has to work with one card, the synergies, you know, the names on the tin, just do as we say, that has made a modern deck that I want to play. So it's not all bad. The two cards I'm going to talk about today are Voger, Jaws of the Conclave, and Slogurk, the Overslime. Two cards that are quite far apart in release. There's 2 or 3 years between them. I'm a little bit late to the Slogurk train. I remember it coming out, but I just didn't care for it. Anyway, before we get into it though, and how I think both of those cards have got a bit of bad design going on, a quick message from today's sponsor.
Get ready for March foil madness when you order from CoolStuffInc.com. During the month of March, each Magic the Gathering order will receive a free foil, with some lucky customers receiving a foil rare or one of these special promos. Get your orders in now at CoolStuffInc.com. Cool stuff in stock.
And you're back in the room. Let's talk about Slogurk first. We'll come to Voger. Slogurk is a 3-mana 3/3 ooze, a legendary creature, much like most creatures in Magic are these days. It has trample whenever a land you is put into your graveyard from anywhere, but a +1/+1 counter on Slogurk, the Overslime. And you can remove 3 +1/+1 counters from Slogurk to return it to its owner's hand. And when Slogurk leaves the battlefield, return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand. So, it has 1 keyword and 3 abilities, making 4 lines of text. Here's a fun anecdote. I played against this in Modern the weekend just past in a aggro rug assault loam deck. Again, I will probably do a video about this deck on the channel soon. Either way, I missed the middle line, or at least I read it and didn't process it in time that it can bounce itself back to hand. So I thought it had to be sacked, pathed, bounced, or something to get the lands back into your hand. Instead, it gets bigger when you put lands in the graveyard. It can remove counters from itself to bounce itself back to hand, which then triggers its last ability to put lands from graveyard back into hand. It does all 3 things. It enables you putting lands into the graveyard by giving you a threat. It then can put lands back into your hand to undo said thing or to tutor the things you've been through self-mill or whatever. And then it enables that by bouncing itself. There is no work needed from the player. There's no other card needed. You don't have to synergize to get what you want. Slogurk is a really interesting and cool Magic card, but I don't think it's a clean or good design, because I think it does too much. I think it does the thing and enables the thing by enabling itself to be bounced. Once upon a time, commanders and legendary creatures would require other components to really pop off, but we often see now legendary creatures that just enable themselves. And maybe I'm being a boomer, but I think you should have to do a little bit of the legwork. Wizards shouldn't hold your fucking hand and wipe your ass for you. Another commander and legendary creature that I very much like is the uncommon Sir Conrad the Grim from Thrones of Eldraine, which I found out recently was actually printed as a common in a commander deck. No, the set symbol's just trash and I can't tell whether that's common or uncommon. So Conrad the Grim is a 5-mana 5/4 that says whenever a creature enters a graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature leaves your graveyard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. And then for 2 mana, each player mills a card. So it has the outcome, the end result, the thing you want to do of putting things into graveyards or out of graveyards to ping people. And then it has an activated ability which will mill everyone and thus put creatures into the graveyard from anywhere but the battlefield, like it says. It both is the engine in doing the thing, and it's also the payoff. It's both bits. Basically, with Sir Conrad and enough mana, it just wins you the game anyway. Nothing else has to be involved. And again, I like the design and the idea and the pushing you to this cool and interesting way of burning your opponents out. But doing both things is very handholdy. It doesn't expect the player to do anything, any work to get there. Slogurk and Sir Conrad are examples of modern design where legendary creatures cannot be a do-nothing without an extra part. They want to do all the things. And I think that's just... I don't know, I just want people to have to work a little bit for their synergies. Maybe I am really being a boomer this video, but it's something that bugged me when reading Slogurk's design. Then we come to Voger, Jaws of the Conclave, a Naya wolf creature who is originally the Selesnya partner to a Selesnya elf, but I guess he's angry here and there's a fire nearby. That gives him the red identity. Legendary creature wolf, it has vigilance, it has trample, and it has ward 3, and we've only read 1/20th of the card. This card is so dumb. When Voger Jaws of the Conclave attacks, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. Draw a card for each wolf you control. So there's a lot going on with Voger, both in terms of how much shit is written on it, and also how good it is in multiple ways that make it kind of best in class at what it does. First of all, it's a 5 mana 5/5 very on rate, but namely it's a vigilant creature, so there's no downside to attacking with it because it can still block. In Commander, often not having vigilance means that you aren't holding up a blocker for another player that you aren't attacking, so vigilance does an interesting thing in Commander compared to 1v1 where you can just get in for some damage on someone that's open without fear of repercussions. So vigilance is it's slightly more pushed in Commander for that reason. On top of that, it has trample, which means it's got an evasive element to it. It can get over small blockers, can't be chumped. And then ward 3 means a lot of spot removal is going to struggle to kill this without having a lot of extra mana lying around. It's evasive. It can block a big attack after it's also done some damage and got its attack trigger. And it's got ward to make it quite tanky as well. The other thing about ward that I've seen a couple of people mention is that they're stopping playing as much spot removal anymore because a lot of good commanders have ward or gain ward, and it's playing more sweepers. I think, is that a bad thing? Some people complain that sweepers slow the game down, but I've always been the kind of guy that plays 4 or 5 sweepers anyway, so it's much of a muchness, but it's an interesting movement in Commander as ward becomes omnipresent on fucking everything. This attack trigger, Jesus Christ. So at the very minimum, when it attacks with nothing else in play, you will draw one singular card. Your 5/5 vigilant trampling ward 3 creature will draw you a card. Then if you have a singular elf in play, like a mana dork, you will put a counter on not all elves, not all wolves, but all creatures you control. That's the bit I don't get about Voger. It cares about wolves, it cares about elves, but ultimately it will grow your entire team, including Voger itself. It is wildly pushed how good this magic card is. It's defensive, it's aggressive, it draws your cards, and it grows your team. I guess on the upside, it's not a wolf elf, it's not a team up of Voger and his master. What is his master's name? I looked it up, it's Tolsimir, of course, it was on the tip of my fucking tongue. It's really funny because this card is so good that I think it's going to be better than Tolsimir, or any version of Tolsimir. I don't think we'll see people playing Tolsimir as much as we'll see them playing Voger. So I guess Voger does ask you to put an elf into play, which compared to Slogurk or compared to Sir Conrad, it doesn't just do all the things automatically on its own. There is a small amount of work. There is the absolute minimum effort of playing an Elvish Mystic, for example. But on top of that, the other element to Voger's incredibly pushed design of being, quite frankly, probably one of the best creatures doing these kind of things, attacking and drawing cards. The thing on top of that is that Voger instantly becomes one of the best wolf commanders and one of the best elf commanders right out of the gate. When I search for Naya werewolves as an archetype on EDH Rec, the top commanders are Marcisi, Breaker of the Coil, Samit, Voice of Dissent, and Rocco, Cabaretti, Caterer. All of these are not wolves or werewolves, but they're the top commanders in those slots, and I genuinely think that Voger competes with these, except for the fact that Rocco is significantly cheaper. The versatility of Rocco's shooter is also unique compared to what Voger does. Samit's haste is also relatively unique. Getting haste on a commander is not that common. I mean, and by haste, I mean haste for the whole team. So again, these are kind of unique compared to Voger, but ultimately I think Voger is probably better than these cards if you're playing at a slightly lower power level where a 5 or 6 mana commander isn't going to be backbreaking. Meanwhile, I gave a quick cursory search for Naya elves, and the top commanders are Voger, Rocco, and Aboon Moldire Ancestor. Voger not only is enabled by going wide and having lots of elves or wolves in play or some combination of the two, but then it also rewards you for doing that by putting counters on them all as well. There is no risk reward with Voger in terms of what it's asking you to do and what it pays you off for doing and how it pays you off, and also just allowing you to draw cards too whilst growing your team. Look, I don't think it's backbreaking, and it's not going to show up at CDH tables for the most part, but there's just so much text on this card. Again, I think it kind of holds your hand for just being good with a small or minimum amount of effort. Tatova Benthic Druid is a commander that I've played a lot of in my time, and I play less of now because people often complain that having a creature that rewards you for playing lands by giving you a life and drawing you a card is kind of sucky. You know, the Simic value engine, no win con kind of joke. I'll tell you what though, it's definitely got win cons. It can mill you out, it can create a hoof for you, it can make more Scoot Swarms than I have hairs on my anus. It's an impressive deck. But I know why people get frustrated with it. But even Tatova is just like make a land drop, draw a card, and how abusable that is with all of the nonsense you can do with her. It feels kind of paling in comparison to a lot of commanders printed since. From Corvold to Voger, they just do all of the things. And that's the thing, Tatova was definitely designed in the era where commander cards were a focus. That legendary matters as a theme in sets wasn't just a throwback to how Kamigawa was. It's actually a thing that we've seen in multiple sets since, because legendaries matters is good for commander because that's more legendaries for people to build commanders around. But stuff like even Tatova don't feel like someone has gone out of their way to build the best possible commander, word for word, that could work in that color pairing. Whilst Voger and Corvold do feel that way, even if their mana costs are prohibitive. I guess if you really want to be the most competitive version of Corvold or Voger, you drop the mana cost by 1 or 2, right? Then we'll be getting into truly push nonsense territory and probably playable on Legacy Nick Fit. But these cards seem designed by committee, or designed by committee's maybe not the right word, unless that committee is looking to give you the best possible commander that does that thing. And I think there's a lot more, I don't know, rewarding of a gameplay experience and more fun to be had when we're not being given everything on a plate, when we have to build around janky old commanders and janky cards. This is one of the biggest downsides of designing for commander. It doesn't necessarily affect older formats that much, outside of your Hogaks and your One Rings being designed for commander and pushing other formats. But I just hit my microphone. But ultimately, I think that the actual damage is done to commander, where commander games become, I don't want to use the word boring, because attacking with a Voger is going to be fun. And look, I built Bernard recently, I understand it. I was building the War Doctor before I realized that actually it's never going to be fun to play or be playing against. But I just think that it's fun for one person, but it will get old quick, where there's no effort needed to get to that end state, because everything's been done for you before you even built the deck. Anyway, there's some semi-coherent thoughts on Slogurk and Voger and commanders that do the thing but also do the thing. They do the end thing and do everything up to the end thing as well. At least with Voger, you gotta play a couple of elves before you attack. I've been Vincent as PleasantKenobi on the internet. Don't forget to use the link in the description below and the code Kenobi at checkout to get 5% off your order at CoolStuffInc.com, and they're giving free foils with every order as well, as we saw in the ad earlier. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next one. Ta-ta for now.